The Right Podcast. The Right
Well,
Podcast.
am I pure evil? Am I the face of terror sitting here in front of you? Or am I able to talk to you man to man?
We get prosecutors to agree. Adkisson faces 1 count of first-degree murder for now, and he's being held on $1 million bond.
Directly behind Eric Rudolph in the courtroom today, his sentencing hearing was emotionally wrenching. Survivors of his clinic bombing.
Welcome to the Right Podcast on YouTube. What we're going to be doing in this activity, in this video, is dissecting a tweet by Tim Pool. I want to say at the outset, this is not like a Tim Pool takedown or something like that. This tweet was just particularly egregious, and it could have been from any number of folks. So let's take a look at what the tweet says. It says, "It's actually not going in one direction. The country is being torn apart." This is pretty dramatic, hyperbolic, over the top rhetoric. This is what internet personalities, not just Tim Pool, but just in general, this is what folks do, right? You need to be controversial to climb up the algorithm. And it's usually with global conspiracies and these kind of end times prophecies, just secularized. And so in this situation, Tim is saying the country is being torn apart. So that's the end time scenario, and that things aren't going in one direction. Well, what does he mean by that? In the video below, we have a trans individual talking about how trans rights are moving in one direction, essentially, and that respect for trans people is moving in one direction. And you can see at the top of that video, "You will respect us." And so this is a very firm statement. So now, what's Tim saying? Well, none of these people, regardless of who you're talking about with internet personalities, none of these people are going to come out and say trans people are tearing the country apart, at least not on Twitter. Maybe on other platforms, but not on Twitter. So, instead we have this vague kind of in-between statement, but it's really not. And here's why it's particularly frustrating. These folks get pumped up in tweets and other social media platform algorithms by being controversial and by leaving shades of gray. And that's because, people recognize certain keywords, they recognize trends and historical context, and other people don't. They're not privy to that, and they haven't been educated in that reality. And so you have different people arguing over stuff, and that's great because then that's more interaction, that's more activity, it's more eyes on the tweets or whatever your platform is, and it pumps you up. And so you're higher in the search algorithm, right? You're going to be on front pages and things like that. So we kind of have to decipher what it is that Tim is saying. It's actually not going in one direction. So, in the context of this video, this person is saying trans rights are going one way towards respect. And Tim is saying it's not one. So we have to infer, right? And this is when it gets sticky, and this is how these people make their money, because they just disagree with everything that you say, and they actually stand for nothing, right? Everything is goalpost moving. But I think that we can, being educated, and just say, okay, infer that if the video is saying trans rights are moving towards respect, and Tim is saying it's going the other way, it's not going in one direction, or it's multiple directions, and you have to assume at least one of the directions is going towards disrespect, right? And of course, that's history, right? That's the history of trans people, LGBTQ folks. We're talking about prejudice, we're talking about bias, we're talking about social, political, religious persecution, et cetera, et cetera. So after that statement, a short one, good tweet, right? A few words. The next sentence, "The country is being torn apart." And this is added material. No one in the video is talking about the country being torn apart. It's not insinuated anywhere by this person that the country is being torn apart. This is Tim adding this. And so this is the commentary, all right? This is the op-ed piece. And this is the part that was especially troublesome. So again, what do we mean? Now, you're not going to say on Twitter the country is being torn apart because trans activists are forcing blah blah blah. If you do that, one, you could get banned. However, nowadays that's kind of like a badge of honor for these people, as different media platforms are opening up. Getter is going to be a thing with Joe Rogan now, and so that could be a badge of honor. Very juvenile, but yeah, if you don't want to get banned, you're not going to be overt. But more important to these people, you don't want to be pigeonholed into a category, because if you come out and you say something like that, then you're the right-wing anti-trans guy, and you don't want that. You want to be the contrarian guy. You want to be the person that's on the outside, that seems to be objective, that seems to be speaking the truth to the people. It's just populist nonsense. However, much of it is rooted in far right-wing extremism, prejudice, and bias, and this certainly is. There's no way around it. And so, why was this just particularly, difficult to view? A few things. One, doing research on a podcast about Jim Adkisson, who was a man in Tennessee that was radicalized by right-wing media content, and went to a church that he considered to be liberal and shot people. And when these things happen, it's always these he was a lone wolf, he was mentally ill, he doesn't represent. But Jim Adkisson was different, because Jim Adkisson told us in a manifesto why he did what he did, and it was purely political. It was a hate crime, and it was spurred by right-wing media. And you cannot debate that, because he told us that. So I'm going to bounce over here. This is a Substack article that I wrote about it. If you want to check it out, you can. But I go into detail here about Jim Adkisson, but also the media environment that radicalized him. And this is somewhat historical now. This was after the election of Barack Obama, and of course, an African-American man being elected president was one of the triggers that set Jim Adkisson off. However, if you would like to check out the Substack article, Jim Adkisson and Radical Right Rhetoric, so the Right podcast newsletter, and I decipher kind of the history of this, and talk radio, the rise of Fox News. That's the kind of era that Jim Adkisson was in. And so when, viewing what is happening here, this is just an extension of that. It's there's more gray area, and there's reasons for that. It's more profitable to be kind of, in the middle, in the gray. But it's an extension of that same rhetoric that radicalized Jim Adkisson. Something else that kind of particularly made this upsetting. So with Jim Adkisson, I'm on the third podcast where I'm focusing on the survivors of his attack. And again, if you want to know more about that, you can read the Substack article, or the Right podcast is on all the platforms where you can get podcasts. iTunes, Spotify, etc. Just look for the Right podcast, and you can also link up from my Twitter account to the link tree to get there. However, in this third episode that I'm working on, I found that there was this book, Love is the Spirit, The Journey of Courageous and Resilient Community, that was created by the survivors of the attack by Jim Adkisson. And there's a particularly moving part that I want to share with you all. Okay, so here we are, and I don't want to flip through this whole book because copyright infringement, but also I would encourage you to purchase this if you're interested. It's only $10 for a PDF, or you can get a hard copy book, and it's certainly worth reading. But it just so happened that the day that the tweet came out from Tim Pool talking about how apparently people discussing how trans individuals should be respected is somehow tearing the country apart. I mean, that's what we have to insinuate. I was reading through this, putting together information for the next Jim Adkisson podcast on the Right Pod. And yeah, I just want to read this beginning here. In the third paragraph, this is an excerpt from a rededication service from the Reverend Chris Buse. And so this was a reverend at the church where the shooting occurred. A man tried to strike a blow for intolerance, and by doing so, he inspired a gathering Monday night in the Second Presbyterian Church and many other holy places throughout the week. A gathering of Christians and Jews, Muslims and Buddhist believers and unbelievers crowded the aisles, sitting on the stage, standing outside, in the rain, holding, hugging, and helping each other to heal. A man tried to divide us into liberals and conservatives, gay and straight. Instead, his actions united us, making us more willing to listen to each other, care for each other, respect each other, and support each other. And it's a wonderful excerpt, and it goes on. And this is a wonderful book full of wonderful people with many images. The author is a photojournalist, so there's a lot of art and photography. And just in general, looking at this book, it was created because a very bad individual who had a bad life, who made bad decisions, decided to be a coward and attempted to commit suicide by cop, but also shoot, quote unquote, liberals. And, you know, in his manifesto, he discussed specifically his prejudice against gay people in the LGBTQ community. And one of the reasons why he attacked this church is because this church was open to that community, and that this church was attempting to create a safe space for that community, and he could not tolerate that. Now, specifically, kind of getting to that tweet, and, you know, in the article, I discuss how when police searched Jim Adkisson's house after he shot people and attempted to shoot more, unsuccessfully, thankfully, police found a book by Bill O'Reilly, a book by Sean Hannity, a book by Michael Savage, and, you know, I discuss this along with other media personalities, and in this time frame, all the different conspiracies and, you know, all of the hate, and part of that hate being based on this make-believe conspiracy over some LGBTQ community, I don't know what you would call it, attack on straight Christian white men or something. I really don't know. But regardless, in the article, I do kind of dive into that a little bit more. And so with that being said, I went back and looked at this tweet, and it's just, I don't know Tim Pool, and I'm not going to, you know, criticize him as an individual, but after reading that book, I do know that the people in that book are good people. And I do know that the people in that book are educated, and that the people in that book attempt to foster a positive community. And the people in that book work, and the people in that book are attempting to take a tragedy that just a very lowly individual who was radicalized placed upon them and turn it into something good. And so when I see a tweet like this, especially this part that says the country is being torn apart, because that's exactly what Jim Adkisson said. Jim Adkisson shot these people in part because he thought the LGBTQ lobby or what have you was tearing the country apart. And again, not the individual, just in general, these social media platform personalities. I feel like if you're going to have a public facing platform, and you're going to be offering opinions, and people are going to be listening to you for entertainment and possibly guidance, that you have to take some ownership of what it is that you're putting out there. So that's one thing. Now, let me bounce over here. It just so happened as well that a week before that tweet came out, there was a shooting in Denver. Didn't make a lot of news, local news, but like Jim Adkisson, most people don't know him. In 5 years, most people aren't going to know this individual either. And again, there's a Substack article, and there is not a podcast for this yet. There might be one down the road, but not in the near future. And so this individual essentially went on a shooting rampage for an hour, murdered multiple people. And amongst a lot of the things that are in the Substack that I won't get into here, one of his grievances was his belief that the country hated essentially white, male, masculine individuals. And he really did harp on this idea of masculinity, of the alpha male, of the physically strong. And he focused his hatred on what he considered to be weak liberals and effeminate men. And this was just a few days before that other tweet was posted about how apparently trans people are tearing the country apart because they're demanding respect. And again, this is one of the grievances that led this individual to go murder people and shoot people. And these ideas and beliefs don't just come up in a vacuum. Kind of scrolling down here a little bit, and again, I'm not going to get into the specifics. There's the article to do that, but this individual was part of the liminal order, or at least is alleged to have been, by a tweet that was captured by Jack Murphy, who runs this organization for masculine men, I suppose. And so that's what the first screenshot is there. And Jack Murphy, lo and behold, kind of closing the circle, is a frequent guest on the Tim Pool show. And so, no, I am sure that you could go through all of these episodes of Tim Pool, and at no point does Jack Murphy say you should go shoot trans people. However, this is how radicalization happens, right? It's not, for most people, over Nazis and skinheads. Even the alt-right movement is, kind of gone now and blasé. It's this ecosystem that sure encompasses 4chan and maybe Getter in the future and Parler and Gab and all of these things, Telegram and what have you, but also Twitter and Facebook and these more mainstream public facing platforms. And so that's the critique. What I can do is say, I mean, if you're going to be a public facing individual, you need to take that into account and consider the consequences of your actions and speech. But I do think we can at least say that this is tone deaf, having come out only a few days after this Denver shooting, in which a man literally said that he was murdering people because the country hates masculine, straight men, alpha men.
In summary, this is not a Tim Pool takedown, and I'm sure that Tim Pool wouldn't care anyway. This is instead a critique of a tweet that is common among internet media personalities. We must infer that the point of this tweet is to state that trans rights are not only moving towards respect, and that an effort to make that happen is somehow tearing the country apart. Jim Adkisson is a murderer who killed, in part, due to his anti-LGBTQ views. Jim Adkisson was radicalized by right-wing media, and in his manifesto, he specifically called out the idea that liberal, communist, socialists, including members of the trans community, were tearing the country apart. A few days before this tweet, a man in Denver murdered multiple people because he felt the country hated alpha masculine men. He made many anti-LGBTQ comments in the past. People with a large platform, people with many eyes, many ears on them, people who have worked hard and are successful in their media position, need to recognize the consequences of their actions, including what they post and what they say. This was stated 12 years ago now by a survivor of the Jim Adkisson shooting at the Tennessee church.
Nothing much was going through my mind except to get the gun. I went to get my hands on the gun, and I got my hands on the gun. And the minute I got my hands on the gun, the other guys hit him, and we were down on the floor in a second and a half. In the mind, in a troubled and bitter and evil mind, hate speech can lead to violent action. And I think people who are decent citizens need to tell the sponsors who profit from hate speech that we need to cut down on the hate speech that's broadcast.
Man then, 12 years ago, said that these big media companies need to be held accountable for hate speech. Well, things have changed since then, and people on Getter, people on Parler, people on Telegram, people on Twitter, people on YouTube need to be held accountable as well and recognize that they do have a responsibility to their listeners and to the broader community. Again, if you find this interesting, if you would like to see more or hear more, we have a link tree. It's found both on the YouTube page, but as well as the Twitter page as well. We're on Spotify and iTunes. If you like podcasts, we'll be on YouTube. We have a Substack if you like articles instead, and of course, the Twitter page.